Game over, man. Game over.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. So serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to episode 630 from March 31st, 2025, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brennan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. It is going to be a very busy show. We have so much to talk about. Honestly, with all the topics we have on the slate, it really could be 2 episodes, but we're going to do our best to fit it into one little episode here.
We're back to InSession Film News once again.
Yeah, there was so much that happened over the last week. Marvel took the internet by storm with their Doomsday cast announcement.
Hilariously, yeah, I can't wait to talk about that.
There was the one battle after another trailer, new Paul Thomas Anderson coming out. That was a lot of fun. There was James Bond news that dropped that we have to discuss. Coyote versus Acme has been saved officially by Ketchup Entertainment.
Oh, I love ketchup.
Studio Ghibli is in a war with artificial intelligence.
We might not talk about that one. That'll open up a bit of worms.
And people are trying to save the theatrical experience. There's so much to talk about. We won't necessarily have time to get into it all.
No,
we are going to do our best to get into the movie news that dominated much of the landscape over the last week.
Yeah.
And in the back half of the show, we are, of course, continuing our Best Picture movie series as we get to the 1965 film Sound of Music, one of the more iconic Best Picture winners of all time. So look forward to digging into that one as well. All right. As we begin this week's show, let's go ahead and talk about Marvel.
We haven't done a news episode like this in a while. You know, we were talking about we were talking about this offline, JD, trying to determine what type of what type of theme we wanted this episode to have, what type of centralized topic outside of the Best Picture series we're in the middle of. And we realized, no, we got to talk about news. We got stuff to talk about. We've got to round robin this thing. Yeah.
Yes. And I want to talk about Marvel. I want to talk about what the MCU did with the Doomsday casting announcement, the live stream, the 5-hour live stream that people had all kinds of jokes and memes and comments about as they announced what I think is part of the cast for Doomsday.
Seems like
half. Look, say what you will about it. I thought the live streaming broadcast was kind of brilliant from a marketing perspective. As easy of a concept as it is, they got people talking about Marvel for a whole day, and they haven't had a marketing win like that in a long time. It got people excited for the MCU again when there's really been nothing but disappointment and hesitation leading into this next phase.
Yeah.
Now, the thing with Doomsday and Secret Wars, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the comics, with Secret Wars specifically. To really articulate how I feel about this, we need to do a little nerding out, Brendan.
So JD's got to he's got to give us an educational piece, a little bit of a class, if you will.
Yeah, we're going to go.
Doomsday and Secret Wars is.
Yeah, class is in session formally as we get into this.
All right, Professor Duran, let's hear what you got.
All right, so I'm going to have some fun with this, and we'll see what you think, Brennan, of my thoughts about where this is all leading to. All right. Doomsday and Secret Wars. Again, I'm not sure how familiar you are, Brendan, with the comics, or anyone listening, how you're familiar with the comics.
Yeah, vaguely. I'd say this is more for those listening who have no familiar.
That have no clue.
I feel like I have a good sense of what Secret Wars is, especially the iteration that I feel like the MCU is tackling with this story, which I'll let you speak to it first before I give my thoughts.
Okay.
But I have a good sense of where I think it's going.
Okay. Yes. So there was the 1984 run, the original Secret Wars 1984 run, which I have read, but it's been a long, long time since I've read that specific iteration. There was also a 2015 run of Secret Wars as well. The Russos have talked about how these two films, Doomsday and Secret Wars, they are going to be a combination of both of those runs. So to bring clarity to it, in simple terms, the 1984 run took all of the heroes of Marvel and all of the villains of Marvel and put them on a planet called Battleworld.
Right.
Where they would fight for their realities. And it was all puppeteered by a character named the Beyonder.
Yeah.
The 2015 iteration of Secret Wars was a little different. And this is where it will be a little familiar to where the MCU is right now with the multiverse saga. But
this 2015 edition, if you will, is where I feel like most of the threads are pulling from with regard to you.
Yes. Because in the 2015 iteration, it wasn't heroes and villains. It was two universes colliding as a result of an incursion.
And to save their respective universes, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
An incursion. What is that? Well, I'm glad you asked, Brendan.
I totally asked, yeah.
The MCU has explained this sort of in some of the films, but again, for those that have no clue what we're about to get into, an incursion is when two universes are about to collide, and the only way to stop it is you have to destroy one of the universes, which of course will lead to conflict. If nothing is done about it, if it's just left alone, then both universes will be destroyed as a result of the incursion. So that is the conflict. That is the fundamental drama of Secret Wars and the 2015 run, meaning that instead of heroes and villains, it is the heroes of those universes respectively fighting it out to save their reality. Yeah. And that's why that is so important here, because that's why the Avengers and the X-Men make sense to me as dueling forces for these films, especially because on the film side of things, there isn't really enough cannon fodder on the villain side for it to be all that interesting. Something that is amplified further when you consider the reputation for the MCU for the longest time, and that their villains have left a lot to be desired.
They've been
Not
very
all
blank.
of them, but
They've
many
been
of
very
them.
blank slates. Yeah, the heroes have left the imprint, if you will, which is to say what they're essentially doing here. For those who are only familiar with the MCU, the movies specifically, think of this as an intergalactic civil war, essentially.
Yes. Yeah, between universes.
Right.
And I like that approach because, one, again, the villain cannon fodder, especially on the film side. The comics have been much more interesting, but on the film side of things, it has left much to be desired. And we've talked about that a lot over the years. Those movies, the MCU movies, they've been about the hero's journey, and that's what's made them effective and distinctive from something like the DC universe, for example.
For sure.
So I don't know how interesting it would be if it was a bunch of Marvel villains getting together to fight a collective of the Avengers and the X-Men. Maybe that would be fun from an action perspective, but it would be fleeting and hollow from a dramatic perspective. I think following the 2015 run makes the most sense, to your point earlier, especially given the context of this phase where they've established incursions, they've established the multiverse. It's the Avengers from the 616 universe that we know versus the Fox X-Men from another universe. It all aligns perfectly into Secret Wars given what they've done or what they've established already. But in this case, instead of the Beyonder, it will be Doom puppeteering the conflict between the X-Men and the Avengers. That's ultimately how I think this is going to go. And with what we know about the Thunderbolts, there's a character involved with that film That is confirmed for Doomsday. Yep.
Yep,
you
that's
nailed
what you're
it.
thinking of. Yep.
Yep. That will give us entry into the Void. And if you've seen Loki, if you've seen Deadpool and Wolverine, you know what the Void is. That it was depicted in both of those films. That, I think, will become Battle World for the film, for the Secret Wars film, the major conflict and fight that we're going to get. I think
that makes sense.
That's what will become Battle World. Now, with all of that laid out, I think the other big reason the X-Men is involved here and why I think Marvel is doing this is, one, there are plenty of X-Men characters to create spectacle and stakes given the amount of Avengers characters that we already have. But more vitally, Marvel hasn't had time to introduce the X-Men into the MCU.
So they've just kind of messed back.
They've messed up with the whole King thing. They got bogged down in the multiverse stuff. Whatever the original plan was, it did not work out. And the X-Men never got a proper 616 introduction. So how do we get around that? Well, you bring back the
old X-Men, and then that gives you some leeway to make the transition when you can.
Exactly, because you don't need any character building. We already know them. It's a built-in cheat code. Younger audiences might be lost if they haven't seen those Fox X-Men films. Something I think Marvel is willing to gamble on here, because I think that's exactly why they're doing this.
Yeah, they're trying to close a loop here, but they're trying to do as little setup work as possible, which honestly,
100%.
They kind of shot themselves in the foot in a lot of ways in order to get to this point. But I could see why they're doing it, and I do have sympathy for them going this route because it makes sense. They're trying to do as little introductory work as possible. So that way, when Avengers Doomsday starts 5 minutes in, we're already into the meat of the story. They have 100%. No setup to
Exactly. Yep. They are banking on most people having seen those movies and knowing those characters, even if just on a broader sense, you know who Logan is, you know who Professor X is, you know who Scott is, you know what defines all of those characters. And I think Marvel is leaning on us already having that knowledge in our minds to some degree or another. And you couple that with how we associate Patrick Stewart and Ian McKellen and James Marsden with those characters and so on and so forth, which means we are emotionally invested in them as well. So when the movie begins, it's not even just that we're up to speed in terms of character development, but there's an emotional attachment to it as well, thus giving the film stakes as the action unfolds. I don't know if I agree with that approach, but if you're going to rush things like we saw with the DCU,
I mean, the only way to go about
it, there's some sort of foundation cinematically.
Yeah, there's at least some groundwork that has been laid over the years. So at least some of the preliminary work was perhaps unintentionally done already. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to lead to a good movie. In fact, it might not lead to a good movie.
It might not work. We'll see.
Yeah, but at this point, I think this is all Marvel has in order to start closing the loop on this multiversal saga that just hasn't been working, honestly.
Yeah, and that verbiage, I think, is really important here, because I think once we see the incursion, the Fox X-Men universe colliding with our Avengers 616 universe, however that plays out, at the end of it, I think that will be the end of the cinematic run regarding those X-Men characters. I do think we're going to get 616 X-Men characters, aka a completely new cast.
Yeah.
That will be able to take over the new X-Men within the MCU. And maybe by new, that is the McAvoy Fassbender version of those characters.
Maybe we'll see them again within this new MCU timeline, whatever that timeline is, if it is 616 or not. But I feel like Marvel, Kevin Feige, the Russos, and the entire team here, they're utilizing Doomsday and Secret Wars to not just close the loop on, let's say, the X-Men and the multiversal saga, but it feels like what they want to do is when they get to a new phase and a new saga post Secret Wars, They want to tighten this back up to a very streamlined single timeline once again.
Yes.
And maybe this could be a new X-Men timeline kind of leading this new journey. Maybe with the Fantastic Four in there as well. I'm not really sure, but they're really trying to tighten this up with some new blood.
I agree. So I think, like they're wanting to pander to nostalgia.
Sure.
And as we've noted, they haven't had an opportunity to establish any new X-Men characters in our 616 timeline.
Mm-hmm.
Given that we're kind of desperate, we need a big win. Let's go ahead and use the X-Men characters that everyone knows that we've seen over the years. Let's throw them into this movie. I do think that is kind of smart, given what Secret Wars is. It would only work in this context.
Yeah. It's smart given what hand that they've been dealt with. This is the only choice
which
that
they did
have.
Create. It's self-sabotaged.
It is,
but...
yeah. but in a way, it's like they're, without actually saying this out loud, they're kind of admitting defeat. Saying like, okay, we know what we've been doing over the past few years just hasn't been working. This is our way, at least, to attempt to remedy that.
Yes, I agree. And given that we've already established all of these X-Men, or not X-Men, Marvel Avengers characters over what is a decade and a half at this point. We're actually getting closer to 2 decades.
That's insane.
Which is wild. Yeah. So we've been at this for 2 decades. We know these characters. We're banking on you knowing the X-Men characters. You can just get right into the action. And given what Secret Wars is, if they do stick to the comics at all, it is just going to be a huge spectacle with Doom puppeteering. Yeah. The other caveat to all of this, and I somewhat teased this a moment ago, I think what we saw is only half of the cast. I think there's another 25 more names.
I think we have a lot more coming. Most people have noticed the lack of any Spider-Man, whether it be Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire, or Andrew Garfield. There are other X-Men characters that we haven't seen announced as well.
Jean Grey.
And I think this is going to lead to a very similar Civil War-like thing. I don't think it's only going to be the Earth 616 versus the Fox X-Men. I don't think it's going to be that simple. I think there's going to be a mix and match here of people who either agree with what Dr. Doom is trying to do versus those who don't want to see this incursion happen. And it's going to lead to difference of opinion here.
Yep, I totally agree. I think what we're going to end up seeing, I do think we're going to see another live stream, whether that be in the next week or so. I don't know. But I think we're going to get a very similar live stream, but the camera is going to go in a reverse angle. So in the live stream, we saw this last week, we were moving from left to right all the way through that hallway, or I guess they were in this giant warehouse. I think the other live stream will be the antithesis. It will move from right to left, pan all the way down to Downey Jr.'s Doom at the very end once again.
He'll be splitting the difference.
In the middle, splitting 2 huge lines of chairs to visually represent that he is the one controlling both sides of it. And I totally agree with what you're saying. I think them combining X-Men and Avengers is done purposefully. Because I think they do want to create.
I think they're telling us the team. They're telling us the 2 teams here.
The 2 teams, yeah, exactly. Which will be a mix of Avengers and X-Men, and that'll be the conflict. What do we do here? How do we approach this? And there's, like we saw in Civil War, it's going to create factions.
I think a huge telling point as to why they're doing it this way and why we think they're doing it this way is the fact that we have gotten confirmation of the Fantastic Four already, and they are together on a single team, which I think allows us to speculate that something's going to happen in the Fantastic Four First Steps that ties directly into Doomsday. That movie's essentially going to be Captain America the First Avenger, and how it feels like its own separate adventure until the final 2 minutes. And then something happens that directly ties it to Avengers Doomsday. What's most likely going to happen, I mean, I can't say most likely because obviously I am not a psychic. I have no idea what Marvel is actually doing, but I'm speculating here. We have 2 universes that we're essentially focusing on here. Earth 616 and then the X universe, the X-Men universe, the Fox universe specifically. I think the Fantastic Four First Steps is going to be a third party. I don't think it's either universe. And I think that movie is probably going to end with the destruction of their universe and maybe how they actually play a part into wanting to save another universe because of what they've gone through. So I feel like that's why they're still all together, because they have a shared experience. It's going to tie into the same ramifications of those same teammates.
I do think you're onto something there. I wonder as well if and how Doctor Strange is involved, because if we remember at the end of Multiverse of Madness, we get that stinger that the events of that film led to an incursion. Well, which incursion are we talking about here? Are we talking about an incursion that leads to the Doomsday Secret War scenario, or is it a different incursion, maybe one, to your point a moment ago, that destroys the Fantastic Four universe?
Yeah.
It could be that as well. So I would not be surprised if at the end of the Fantastic Four First Steps, we do get some sort of Strange cameo that tethers to the end of Multiverse of Madness in some sort of way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's what's going to happen. And I think they're saving, like we said, I think they're saving a lot of other names for some other announcement that showcases the other side of that conflict. And it's going to be another mix of MCU favorites and X-Men favorites with differing opinions once again. I just hope it doesn't take another 5 hours. We haven't talked about, really talked about the choice of reveals here, the way that Marvel handled the marketing of it. I think the concept is brilliant. I think the use of empty director's chairs with names on it is so simple, but it's very effective. I like that. And I am so torn on the choice to make this 5 freaking hours. It lingers on each chair for what, like 12 minutes before just slowly panning to the next one. Because on one hand, you said this earlier, it got people talking. For better or for worse, it got people talking. And sometimes the best marketing is the kind that ruffles some feathers, right?
Yeah.
And this one did. But given the place that Marvel is in right now, I don't know if they've earned the right to ruffle these kind of feathers. Like it's honestly kind of disingenuous in a way. And I'm so torn on that choice, to be perfectly honest.
I mean, look, in all transparency, I work in marketing all day. That's what I do.
Yeah.
When I'm not doing in-session film stuff, my day job, I work in marketing. I thought it was brilliant. It got people talking. And look, sometimes in marketing, a lot of the times in marketing, perhaps, it is about, ruffling a little feathers. You want to get people talking about your product. Again, for better or worse.
Yeah.
When you get that kind of exposure, it's a huge win. Even if it's a tweet where someone is complaining about how you're wasting everyone's time. 5 hours, we're wasting everyone's time. This is disingenuous bullshit.
That
and it goes super viral and gets 120,000 likes on Twitter.
Yeah,
Marvel is laughing their ass off.
They plan that
that's a huge win.
They planned that response. I think.
Yeah.
I think they were very intentional about that. It's been very it's been very common for people to jokingly say how Marvel's announcement could have just been an email. It could have been an email, and honestly, it could have been an email.
It could have been a press release, 100%.
That would not have gotten people talking. Honestly, I think Marvel. And again, I say this kind of begrudgingly because given the track record of Marvel right now, I don't think they've earned the right to piss people off like they've done here. But that's kind of what they need at the same time. So it's kind of a double-edged sword.
I mean, and also, I look at it this way. The comments about people, where people are talking about how like they're wasting everyone's time. This is disingenuous, is disrespectful. You don't have to watch, my man. You don't.
I mean,
you don't have to watch.
I didn't watch.
I follow this a lot. Obviously, we're here talking about it. Yeah. Guess who didn't watch the live stream live? This guy.
Both of us, apparently.
You know why? Because I had better things to do than watch a goddamn live stream where a camera panned or strolled along every 12 minutes. I had other things to do. I did not watch it.
The viewership
you don't have
numbers
to.
But the viewership numbers for it during the entire 5 hours from what I understood, didn't it stay fairly steady for most of it?
Oh my gosh, it got millions of views across all the platforms. Yeah,
I know, but like given how long it was, I don't recall there being that much of a drop off from the beginning.
No, there wasn't. A lot of people were watching live, and if you were hate watching, I mean, that's on you, my man. That's don't have to watch. That is your choice. I'm sorry. Like I didn't watch it. I waited for the tweets to come along, or I just checked randomly back every 12 minutes. Like that's all that I was doing. And I did not get upset. I'm sorry. There was nothing to get mad about.
I was keeping track with each individual new tweet that came about when a new name was revealed. And when you operate on X nowadays, it's all jumbled out of order based on popularity. So I was getting it all out of order. I was getting like the full list. Then I was getting, oh, this just in, Pedro Pascal will be in. It's like, wait, I just saw his name on the full list. Why is this coming later? So it was very bass backwards for me. But again, to our point, I think, sometimes good marketing is about churning a conversation out of people. Yeah. And sometimes it's not the most friendly conversation. And those are the ones that sometimes stick.
Yeah, absolutely. It got people talking. And even the people that were coming off mad, I don't think were really mad. I think they were just frustrated that this was an email and that's all it could have been. But you didn't have to watch. And if you're not, like, if the fundamental approach to Doomsday and Secret Wars, like, you have a problem with, that's fine. Yeah, we can talk about that. That's a separate issue. But getting mad at a live stream, okay. I mean,
there are plenty.
You maybe go to therapy because that's not healthy.
There are plenty of things in the world to get mad at. I mean, you can get mad at rising egg prices as much as you want, but if you're getting mad at a live stream, then you've got a sad life. My friend.
Exactly. There are plenty of real world issues to get mad at. And yes, express your anger, let it all go in that manner. But a Marvel live stream is the last thing on the list to get angry about. I'm sorry. It's just not that big of a deal.
No judgments or anything like that, but also judgments.
Yeah, also, like, just go live your life. You don't have to be on Twitter 24/7.
Go for a walk. Enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah, like, it's okay. It's okay. Like, other people are watching this. Just look for their tweets. They'll tell you. I promise you. They'll put it out there. Discussing film. Just get the notifications. I promise you'll find out one way or another. It's okay.
I sometimes love that account still exists.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So like, and they're gonna do another one. We're gonna get 25 more names. So next time, take a cheat. Go outside, take a breath, and it'll be fine.
Here's the question. Will they do it the same way? Will it be another 5 hours, or will they do something completely different?
If it was me, I would do what I suggested earlier. I would do the exact same thing, but roll the camera the other way. Again, leading to Doom in the middle.
At least it allows for pyramid. It allows for consistency in that regard. So to do something so differently, I feel like would make it seem too disconnected.
Sense thematically. It makes sense given what Secret Wars is going to be. So I think all of this is aligning perfectly. Really the big question, as far as I'm concerned, getting back to the film aspect of this, it's going to come down to execution. And there's not much the Russos have done lately that gives us inspiration and hope. But I will say, I will still go to bat for Infinity War and Endgame. I think those movies are great.
A lot of people would.
And I want to say you mentioned this. I can't remember if you and I talked about this last week, or maybe you mentioned this in the review for the Electric State. I can't really recall. But someone on Twitter, there was a tweet going around about how the Russos are perhaps better served when they don't have to do any sort of character work. They can just kind of get to the action.
Yeah.
And that's maybe why Infinity War and Endgame worked so well, because they didn't really have to do any sort of major character work, at least the building of something, right? Now, what they did in terms of taking those characters where they were at the beginning of Infinity War and developing them through Endgame, I thought was really good, especially characters like Thor and Tony Stark. Fantastic. But they didn't have to do anything from the beginning. They didn't have to build anything from scratch. And maybe that's where there could be some hope for the Russos coming back for Doomsday and Secret Wars.
They are not auteurs, and that's not a knock on them. Some directors work best when they don't fall into the category of the auteur theory, right? They work better as a cog in an overarching wheel. And I think they need like a governing body, like a Kevin Feige or an entire Marvel corporation to guide them. Yeah, and I think that's why their stuff has worked better within the MCU, because they are functional directors when they have that blueprint to work with. But when they're trying to create that blueprint, they're just not those directors. Not so much. That's why some of the best work they've ever done as filmmakers outside of the MCU is probably any episode they directed of Community or Arrested Development. That's the best stuff they've ever done. And that's a similar kind of thing. There's a governing entity spearheading where those TV shows are ultimately going, a group of writers and a creator. So that's how they work. That's how they operate. That's their sandbox.
Absolutely. Which gives me hope, because when we get to Doomsday, especially if we have 50 characters involved, there isn't going to be any sort of character work. It's just going to be spectacle. And if they're able to regurgitate the magic they did with Infinity War and Endgame in that regard, then they'll be fine. I think they'll be perfectly fine for those movies. And Marvel needs a big win. They are desperate for a big win. And I think that's just another reason I didn't have an issue with the marketing gimmick, because they got that. They got their first big win in a long, long time. And got people talking, maybe giving people some hope that this is going to be something exciting, especially because a lot of us, you and I included, were very, very dubious about Robert Downey Jr. Coming back.
Doom. We basically got confirmation, loose confirmation,
and they confirmed,
if you will, that this is going to be a Tony Stark variant.
Yes, and that his death, Tony Stark's death in Endgame, has a direct correlation to this iteration of Doom. Right. So they are very, very much tied together. So there is, I guess, some poetry there. But given how great I thought it was capping that character, I'm still dubious. But if they can make it work in execution, then I'll give them props if they can make that work.
I'll say this: if they can make it work, great. Y'all saved your own asses. Don't do it again. We are done bringing back these old characters now.
Yeah, and I do think the Marvel has botched this in a lot of ways. The multiverse saga in the comics is a lot of fun. And I think in the film world, it could have been really, really great if they handled it well. And they just didn't. They fumbled it all together. Like I know Spider-Man No Way Home was one of the first in the multiverse saga. I almost think that it should have began there maybe sooner than it did, and really use that to kind of prop this saga moving forward with different movies, with different stories that really took advantage of it. But they were so lost. I mean, you got the multiverse of madness, but so much of phase 4 and 5 haven't really taken advantage of what that movie was. Yeah. And it's led to this point now where even when we get to Fantastic Four, which technically begins phase 6, I guess we got Thunderbolts before we get there, but once we get to phase 6, it still feels like the foundation is a little soft. So we'll see what Fantastic Four brings and what the Russos can bring. And the other major question I have here is, what is this Spider-Man movie going to be in between Doomsday and Secret Wars? Because
that's the thing that worries me the most.
Well, And here's the thing. I would assume that if they are going to bring in 25 more names, and I really do think that is the case, you would think Spider-Man is going to be among those names. He's one of, if not the biggest Marvel character. How do you not have Spider-Man in that movie? Especially when he is there in a prominent way in the comics. However, from a film side of things, the last thing we saw with Spider-Man is that Peter Parker has been erased from everyone's minds. Spider-Man is still there, but nobody knows who he is. I don't know how he would get involved in that case unless it's from someone outside of the universe that did not catch the spell. I don't know.
I don't know, but that's the thing that scares me the most, and is how they're going to write Tom Holland's Spider-Man into this, given the ending of No Way Home. And we talked about this when we reviewed No Way Home. One of the charms of that movie is that it crystallized a Spider-Man trilogy that essentially functioned as a new origin story for a street-level hero. And it was going to be exciting to know that Tom Holland was going to be coming back as that character in a completely new way that can set itself up as its own thing. And I was looking forward to that. They can't do that now. like clearly they can't do that. So do they need a fourth movie to try to bridge the gap to finally close the loop a second time? That's the thing that worries me.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, and because this new Spider-Man movie is coming out after Doomsday.
Yeah.
I don't know, because if it came out before Doomsday, I think there's a possibility you could have your cake and eat it too, where it does start off as the street level Spider-Man that we want to see. Yeah. And then by the end of the movie, maybe he sees the incursion or something happens where he is called upon to be at Battle World for the events of Doomsday. Okay. That would make sense given the MCU and what their formula is. But I mean, that happens after Doomsday. So like, what do you, like, I don't know how you're going to bridge that gap there. And it is a little disappointing because right now we have Daredevil Born Again currently playing. I think it's awesome. I've really loved it. And it'd be great to see Kingpin, like Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin and Spider-Man, go at each other. I mean, that is, you talk about one of the most iconic villain hero duos in Marvel Comics. It is Spider-Man and Kingpin. Like, that is right up there with Fantastic Four and Doom.
Sure.
And we've never got that in film form. I think it would be awesome to have Tom Holland's Spider-Man, who, as you just pointed out, has been set up to be a street level superhero now. Yeah. He can go be with Daredevil and fight Kingpin. And so we would get that. We would finally get to see that. And the 10-year-old Marvel fan in me would absolutely lose it if that was to happen. I would love to see that. I don't know if the MCU has, I don't know if they're in a position to do that anymore though.
I think they've shot themselves in the foot. I don't know how they're going to course correct that. And I don't even know if I want them to course correct that. That's a course correction I never really wanted in the first place, but I feel like they have no choice now. Yeah.
So we'll see. I really don't know what to make of that Spider-Man movie. I have no idea what to expect now. It could be anything.
I like its director. I like Daniel Cretton. Yeah. I think he's pretty good. I don't necessarily doubt the quality of the movie. I think if anything, I just doubt the placement of it in this saga. That's really the thing I doubt more than anything else.
I know. So we'll see. We'll see.
Marvel's doing things.
Yeah, we'll have plenty of more to talk about once we get to the end of July. Once we see Fantastic Four, what happens there, what it leads to, this conversation will be continued at that point.
I say this very cynically. I'm not really going to do this, but man, if Thunderbolts and Fantastic Four First Steps are just not good, I'm going to laugh. And not because it's something I want to see. It's just going to be such a ridiculous outcome that it's going to suck. It really is.
Yeah. Well, I'm not expecting much out of Thunderbolts anyway. To me,
Sure.
if it can be like Peyton Reed Ant-Man level, that's a win. That's all I'm expecting is
Which
to
one?
be at that
First
level.
2 or Quantumania?
No, the first 2. Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say there's
clarified.
There's
yes.
a very different Peyton Reed operating in the first
Yes.
2 Ant-Man movies
I agree.
versus Quantumania.
Yeah, no, like I'm just thinking like the first X-Men, first X-Men, the first Ant-Man. That's all that I want as far as quality goes. That's all I'm expecting.
Pretty fun
If
movie.
it can get to that level, we're good. Fantastic Four, on the other hand, to your point, that I think needs to be better than Ant-Man to really get people excited.
That needs to be a top 10 MCU film, I think. I actually think it needs to be that good. It kind of needs to. If it's anything below that, it's just not going to churn the right kind of excitement.
I agree. That's got to hit.
Yeah.
So we'll see. A few months away, July 25th, that film comes out. So
it does. That's right.
We'll talk about that one here in a few months' time. All right.
Marvel.
Let's transition. Before we get to the Sound of Music, I, at the very least, want to get to a few more of these items we have here on the list. Let's talk about James Bond, R.I.P. to a franchise that we loved. It was a great run. It was a great run, Brendan. It's all over. But
is it though?
It has. Well, I guess it depends on who you ask, because James Bond is not only coming back. Oh, we're so back. It is coming back in a big way, where you're going to get your James Bond movies and at a minimum 6 spin-off movies. At a minimum 6 spin-off movies. Because James Bond is going to one Amy Pascal and David Heyman, and boy, oh boy, I am not excited for that.
I'm mixed. Because I feel like there are 2 conversations to have here. On one hand, you have 2 names who have spearheaded very successful franchises, though they are the kind of franchises I don't know if I want to see get James Bondified, which I think is a very fair conversation to have. What I will say, though, is first off, I like that David Heyman's here, who has a very British history. So they are keeping to the British theme, if you will, of James Bond. And with Amy Pascal, I know she's got a lot of recent work backing a lot of the Spider-Man films, most notably with Tom Holland, and I believe the Spider-Verse films as well, if I'm not mistaken. But apparently she is someone that's also been tied to the James Bond franchise during the Craig era. And from what I understand, she was the one that very actively pushed against the idea of Bond and Blofeld being brothers in Spectre. And if that's true, I'm glad she's on board, because at least that means that she kind of gets some of the things that maybe this franchise should have been doing from the get-go that it didn't learn from its own mistakes. I'm still fearful of this, primarily because I don't know how true this is. I'm not sure if you heard about this yet, JD. Obviously, a director has not been announced yet. That's not confirmed. I believe there is speculation as to who David Heyman wants for James Bond 26.
Okay.
And it's someone I don't want to see make a James Bond film. He apparently wants Alfonso Cuarón.
Oh boy. Okay. Well,
great director, amazing director, one of my guys, if I'm being honest.
Well, I guess it depends on the context, because if that means that if we get to see a Cuarón movie in the aftermath of this James Bond, I think that's a sacrifice I'm willing to take. Especially because the last time Alfonso Cuarón dabbled into IP filmmaking, he basically
helped
just turned
save
out
a
the
franchise.
best Harry Potter movie.
I mean, in a way, he kind of, I don't want to say course corrected the Harry Potter franchise, because it already started off very successfully, but he kind of rebranded the vision of what it was going to do going forward. I mean, in some ways, while it wasn't the first Harry Potter film, it might as well have been the first aesthetic defining Harry Potter film.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, and it's one of the most emotionally potent.
Sure.
I mean, that's a phenomenal movie. I don't know how much he was familiar with Harry Potter going into any of that.
Apparently not.
I presume.
Much. Apparently not.
He
much,
read the book.
I gotta fact check myself on this. I don't even think he read the book.
I mean, it would not surprise me. That film is so different than the book.
Yeah.
But so effective. And that's the brilliant thing about Cuarón. He just might be that good of a filmmaker where he got the script and just went into it almost blind and just made an Alfonso Cuarón movie. And then it just happens to be the best of the Harry Potter movies. Like, okay, I'll take that. And if that's how he's going to treat Bond, I'm not opposed to that, especially if that means if they promise him, hey, come do this Bond movie, we'll guarantee you money for your next auteur project.
And we're giving you creative freedom to make the film that you want to make with James Bond 26. So that's why I'm having
that's
kind
a
of
win-win as far as I'm concerned.
I'm having a bit of a war with myself with this potential directing choice and the fact that Amy Pascal and David Heyman are behind it. Because on one hand, it does demonstrate that apparently Amazon is taking this buyout very seriously, which I do appreciate. If that's true, I do appreciate. Whether they start milking it afterwards, we'll have to wait and see. And I'm with you. I think that they will. The thing that makes me a little about the possibility of someone like an Alfonso Cuarón coming in to direct a James Bond film is that given his sensibilities, it would have made way more sense to bring him on while Daniel Craig was still James Bond. I feel like his sensibilities as a director fits the Craig era. And selfishly speaking, I want James Bond to move away from that. I don't necessarily need a cartoonish James Bond, but it feels like what they're doing is that they're trying to create sort of a soft transition to a new James Bond era, if you will. One that still feels a little bit familiar, but a little bit new at the same time. Kind of like what GoldenEye did back in 1995, which was very new given the Pierce Brosnan of it all, but that was originally intended to be a Timothy Dalton Bond film. And you can kind of sense two tones kind of battling each other in a way. In that one.
Again, going back to the Harry Potter of it all, maybe you're right that tonally he fits a Craig very well. Mm-hmm. But I think he could do I like the 90s Bond movies. The way that you're articulating it there, I think he could do that very well. When I look at Harry Potter, and there is an emotional prowess to Azkaban for sure, but there's plenty of humor and goofiness to that film that I think is handled extremely well from a tone management perspective. And I think the total accumulation of Azkaban is closer to the Pierce Brosnan Bond than the Craig Bond. So I think if totally they want to go back to that, I have zero reason to doubt him.
Spectre was kind of goofy, and I actually think that movie kind of works. I don't know. I could see your point. I could see your point that Alfonso Cuarón is definitely one of those filmmakers that could still be very adaptable given the material that he is tasked with. I guess maybe why I'm a little trepidatious is because selfishly, I kind of wanted to see James Bond enter a phase that's very much like a Scott Pilgrim versus the World kind of vibe, if I'm being perfectly honest, which I think most people probably don't want to see. I'm willing to admit I might be in the minority on that one. But that's maybe the headspace I'm coming at here is I just really wanted to sense something so drastically different.
I mean, where I kind of agree with you, when we brought this up a few weeks ago, you asked me where I want this franchise to go. And what I said was, let's go back to Sean Connery.
Yeah.
And go back to that formula because I thought it was a lot of fun. It was extremely crass. Maybe you can update the crassness to be, maybe, I mean, like you could thread that needle a little bit better, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Maybe that's why we do get an Alfonso Cuarón, to get a new kind of crassness in here. Maybe he films it like he does Y Tu Mama Tambien. We have some very new types of sex scenes to put into the James Bond franchise. maybe
if you're going to go that route, but I was going to say if you go the Connery route, that's where I'm probably less on the Alfonso Cuarón train. But if you're going to go Pierce Brosnan or Daniel Craig and you want to keep to those tones, I think he would be great. I think he would absolutely nail a James Bond from that perspective. And I'm especially for Cuarón if it means that they give him an extra after doing Bond as
a one for me, one for you thing. But I do hope that what he does make still feels very much in keeping with his own filmography, which he was somehow able to do with Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. It is such a Harry Potter film.
That's why they want him. I would imagine David Heyman, and going back to that name, and I'm not as familiar with Heyman as I am. Well, I'm not as familiar with the name David Hammond as I am Amy Pascal. However, we are all very familiar with David Heyman if you go and look at his filmography, because he was all over the Harry Potter films. So he knows Alfonso Cuarón very well. That's probably why he wants him to come to the Spawn, because they've already worked together once on that movie. And, and he's done, speaking of Heyman, he's done all the Fantastic Beasts movies. He's done the Paddington movies as well.
Barbie, Wonka, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
Gravity. He's worked on Gravity with Cuarón.
Marriage Story.
Yeah.
And of course, like none of these movies are alike, because as a producer, you can't really say that there's consistency as far as the creative vision is concerned, but that means he knew how to spearhead the right people and the right talent to get those movies as successful as they were.
He actually has an interesting filmography. He really does.
He's clearly a very good producer, which is why I say if there is any positive to take from this, it's that Amazon is taking this movie very seriously. They are getting good talent here. And like I said earlier, David Heyman, a lot of these movies, especially given the Paddington and the Harry Potters of them all, he brings a very British sensibility to this. And I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. He was a big part of Wonka as well a few years ago. Man, I have to respect the man for not only being a backer of Alfonso Cuarón, but the man loves himself some Noah Baumbach, and so do I.
I was going to say, not just Marriage Story, but White Noise is in there.
White Noise as well, yeah.
That's a cool movie. That's a pretty cool movie.
Yeah, I mean, he seems to be someone that could rein in Amy Pascal if she gets too crazy. I just get so nervous with Amy Pascal, and that she is going to completely milk this. But to be fair to her, it might not be her vision. That could be coming from the top.
I think if anything, at Amazon. I think if anything, she might be more of a joint producer on some of those Spider-Man movies, for instance. So she might not have the full say as to how those movies function as world builders, if you will. Yeah. So maybe that might not necessarily mean that bringing her in for James Bond is that she's there to set up the Marvelization of the James Bond universe, because her producing credits also include Little Women, right? So, or no, not Little Women. Little Women and Challengers, most recently Challengers. So again, there's talent here. There is talent here for sure.
Have you seen the new Seth Rogen show, The Studio?
No, I haven't. I've been hearing so many good things about it.
I don't watch much TV, but it's a show about the making of movies, so that piques my interest. I love that kind of stuff.
That's on my list.
And so I've seen the first 4 episodes. The pilot episode that everyone was talking about last week, it is Seth Rogen, who is an executive at this fictional major studio in Hollywood. His boss, the CEO, the David Zaslav, if you will, of this company, puts him in charge of making the Kool-Aid movie.
Oh, gosh,
so they're inspired by Barbie. They're inspired by Barbie. They got the IP to Kool-Aid, so they got to go make the Kool-Aid movie. And then, look, all this is going to make sense here in a moment.
Oh, gosh.
And then earlier today, there was a report that David Zaslav is like, I'm done with filmmakers. I'm done with movies. We're doing all IP. And it was literally straight out of Bryan Cranston in that pilot episode. It's like it's
wild. I mean, we saw this with The Day the Earth Blew Up, the Looney Tunes movie, right? That apparently David Zaslav is very easily offended. Yeah. He's one to hold a grudge pretty quickly.
Yeah, like it's crazy. So like, it would not surprise me if Zaslav saw Bryan Cranston in that role and aspired to be that or be more crazy than that in real life. It is absolutely wild.
That sounds like a thing for sure.
And the reason I bring that up is to say the head honchos over at Amazon, if they're bringing Amy Pascal into their offices to say, we want you to milk the shit out of this. We paid a lot of money and we want you to turn James Bond into whatever the version of Kool-Aid is for the James Bond franchise. That's what we want you to do. And then she has to somehow manage to do that movie in a way that is going to be interesting and compelling. Mm-hmm. Maybe that is the conflict that she is up against here. And it might not be her fault. I'm just saying the studio has kind of opened my eyes a little bit. Maybe I should be a little bit more gracious toward Amy Pascal because good Lord.
Who knows what kind of hand she's being dealt with right now then.
Yeah. But yeah, because like when I first heard the name, I was like, oh my God, nope. Mm-hmm. I'm out. James Bond, I think I'm done. Mm-hmm. R.I.P. It was a good run. As we've been talking here, I can come around on Heyman at the very least. I do overall really like his filmography here. Mm-hmm. And it suggests that he is someone we can put our trust in. And maybe Amy Pascal as well. I don't know. Like the what have you done for me lately kind of thing has left a lot to be desired as far as Pascal is concerned.
That's why I brought up her history with the Craig era of James Bond. Like I said, I don't know how true this is, but apparently she was one of the people pushing back on the choice to make Blofeld and Bond brothers at the end of Spectre. And I'm actually a defender of Spectre. I actually really quite like that film. Yeah. I think it falls apart in the final act. I think once we get to that evil lair and the rest of the movie follows, that's the Marvelization of the Craig era of the James Bond movies. But everything up until that point, I think, is very effective. So if she was the one pushing back against that choice, maybe she does have a good, like, creative sense as to where this world should go.
That's a good point. And I honestly did not really know all of that. But if that is the case, then all the power to her. And maybe she is the right person for this. We shall see. We shall see. But I'm still a little dubious. And maybe it's less on Heyman and Pascal, and it's just the Bryan Cranston Zaslavs of the world that just are ruining the industry.
Yeah. To give a little more confirmation, Amy Pascal was a former head of Sony Pictures and oversaw the James Bond franchise, at least the distribution of them, which included Spectre and Skyfall and Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace. So that's when that happened.
Okay, before we get to Sound of Music, the trailer for One Battle After Another dropped. We have to talk about it, Brendan. New Paul Thomas Anderson.
And immediately I forgot everything Marvel did that day.
Yeah, forgot both of those happened on the same day, didn't they?
Yeah. Looks like a very visceral movie for even Paul Thomas Anderson. Just given the tonal shift that it seems to represent. Now, of course, it's a trailer. Many of Paul Thomas Anderson's movies and how they're marketed don't reflect the final product at all. But this felt a bit more horrifying by comparison to some of his other films. Like, there just seemed to be a very visceral and tangible, like, roughness to this one. It still looks very much of a piece to what he's been doing lately. It looks gorgeous. And the use of music, I'm assuming some of the music that plays in the trailer is courtesy of Johnny Greenwood, his usual composer. So it still carries some of those same tonal flourishes, but this one looks like it has an edge. And I'm looking forward to a new type of edge from him. He's always one to surprise us, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I got a lot of inherent vibes out of this, and I nearly fell out of my seat. I had a transcendent experience because, my God, do I love that movie.
I like it a lot too. In fact, that's not an accident to sense that, because I think this movie is inspired by Vineland, which is also a Thomas Pynchon novel.
Yes, exactly. So he's going back to that world once again. This looks to have all the makings of what I love about Inherent Vice, and I will defend that movie to my death. I will go to the grave as that is one of Paul Thomas Anderson's best movies. And when I look at this trailer, and again, it's just a trailer, but visually striking. It's Paul Thomas Anderson. We don't expect anything less. That is one of the best elements of Inherent Vice. It is visually incredible, but it also has that remarkable comedic backbone that I just absolutely adore. That seems to be here as well, especially with the crazy central performance with Leonardo DiCaprio. He looks like he's off his rocker and having the time of his life. And I also presume it is somewhat hidden in this trailer, but what is going to be that thematic edge that you were talking about a moment ago? What is that going to be here? Because that hidden element in Inherent Vice is what makes that movie what it is for me. I full on presume that is going to be the case here with One Battle After Another. And from a marketing perspective, I understand why they want to leave that hidden. You know, they want to play up how fun and goofy this is going to be. But the movie will for sure have it, and I'm very excited to see what that is. Among all the other Paul Thomas Anderson traits that make him one of the best working.
I forget which critic it was, but someone put either a tweet or some type of review on Letterboxd out there that essentially said how Paul Thomas Anderson is operating at a level where it has been 29 years since his last movie that wasn't best of the decade material. Which, if you do the math, that's only one movie of his that doesn't qualify as best of the decade material then, because 29 years ago was Hard 8.
And I can't recall who that was either. That might have been that was
probably David Ehrlich.
I was going to say I was thinking Ehrlich, but then I started to question myself. I think it was Ehrlich over at IndieWire, but either way, I don't disagree. I don't disagree
either.
Everything the man makes is best of its year, best of the decade. And I have no reason to doubt that One Battle After Another won't be a part of that crop.
My ranking for PTA films changes every time I choose to revisit that list.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. I mean, when the trailer came out, I made a somewhat, sarcastic or fun, playful response about Inherent Vice, because I do see a lot of Inherent Vice in this trailer. And again, I'll take every opportunity to champion that film. And
the movie's awesome.
At the time, it is really great. At the time, I did have it in my top 3 for my PTA ranking. But to your point, every time I look at it, man, these films can shift on a dime. I could have that film at 4 or even 5 and not lose sleep because so much of this is interchangeable.
My number 1 even changes. Right now, I'll still give the edge to There'll Be Blood only because it was such a formative film for me. That was a movie that morphed me as a film lover. So I'm always going to love it for those reasons. But I mean, at one point, Punch Drunk Love was my favorite of his.
Yeah.
And at another point, Magnolia was my favorite. And then at another point, Magnolia was my least favorite. So he makes good milkshakes. That's all I can say is he makes really good milkshakes.
Yeah. I mean, I've been pretty steady on The Master as my favorite of his.
Okay.
And I don't know if that'll change anytime soon, but anything beyond that is very much up in the air.
Have you given Licorice Pizza another go yet?
No, that's one I need to give that one a go. I mean, I loved it. It was in my top 10 when it came out.
Yeah. But that one is very much due for a rewatch for me.
Yeah. That one I need to see. I'd be curious what a rewatch of that would do to my ranking. As it stands currently, I have Licorice Pizza at 5, but I would also love to revisit Phantom Thread because I haven't seen that in a few years either. A rewatch of that would not surprise me if that jumps into the top 3 or 4 there. So
sure.
I don't know. And Punch Drunk Love, I've always championed that film as well. So like I always had that hovering around 2 after The Master, and had There Will Be Blood at 3, much to the chagrin of others. But that's kind of where I've always had it. But look, I mean, yeah, rearrange anything after The Master, rearrange it however you want. I'm not going to lose sleep.
He's out of his 9 feature films, 1 through 7 are basically tied for first place. All I know is that Hard 8 and Boogie Nights will always be my bottom 2, and that's not a knock on those 2 films. I just feel like those are the 2 where he's wearing his other influences so heavily on his sleeve and hasn't found his own voice just yet. And it's an early filmmaker thing. It makes perfect sense. It's not until Magnolia and especially Punch Drunk Love where I felt like he was channeling something that felt very fresh and contemporary and sort of an amalgamation of these influences to create something new. But that's, again, not a knock on those films because I think they're still very effective in their own right.
No, I mean, the thing about Hard 8 and Boogie Nights, even though he's wearing those influences, he commits to his conviction so hard, 8, if you will, that they're extremely, extremely good still. And
yeah, they're so well made.
Yeah, you still can't help but be immersed into those worlds. The characters are still so fascinating. The way he uses the camera is captivating. And you are right. Once he gets to Magnolia, you do see the sophistication of his filmmaking ethos really rearranged to who we know him to be now. Yeah. And his films are so distinctive as a result.
Yeah, even though Magnolia is very much in line with like Robert Altman with movies like Nashville and Shortcuts especially, they don't feel like those movies. Like there are moments of Boogie Nights where it does feel kind of like a Martin Scorsese movie, more so than some of these other influences that he was wearing on his sleeve. But the thing is, like, that movie's still so damn entertaining. That is a fun movie, Boogie Nights. I mean, until it's not fun for the right reasons, but for the most part, that is a very entertaining movie.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, all of his films are extremely diverting, and he's so good at creating unique, immersive characters and the conflict that arises in these films, the dynamic, the central dynamic of the central characters and all of them, extremely biting. And yeah,
he's good at his job.
Love PTA. Yeah, he's great. Very much looking forward to one battle after another. All right, Brandon, let's talk about coffee. I need coffee. Ooh. I love it.
So
you
good.
love it.
So
we
good.
all need it to survive. And if you're going to drink coffee, you might as well get the best coffee.
It's got to taste good. It's got to be the right stuff.
Taste great.
Got to be the right stuff, my man.
Yeah, it's all about having high-end, gourmet, awesome tasting coffee that is organic. The Coffee Cult's coffee is not infused with chemicals or anything that would amplify a flavor. This isn't flavored coffee. It has immense flavor, but it is organic to the bean. It's specialty grade coffee. It's how it is farmed. It's how it is grown. It's where it is grown. Yeah. All of that is in play. And that's what makes Coffee Cult coffee so special, so unique and distinctive. It is absolutely incredible. You got to go check them out. They have a variety of different blends. They got single origin coffees that you're going to love, whether you want something that is fruit forward or something that is more chocolatey and oaty, whatever your palate is. Yeah. They have that type of coffee available.
Especially if you love your dark roasts like I do.
Yeah.
They know how to get the balance and the taste right for those, which is a very difficult thing for any coffee company to pull off, and they pull it off very well.
Yeah, it's great. I'm telling you, the quality of the coffee is going to blow you away.
Sumatra
Absolutely will blow you away. This is not your store-bought coffee by any stretch of the imagination. It is fantastic. So go to coffeecult.com. That's coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. At checkout, use our code ISF25. Again, that code is ISF25. You'll get 15% off with that code. It is one of the highest discounts that you will get there. So make sure that you use that discount, ISF25, coffeecult.com. And we thank Coffee Cult for their support. All right, Brendan, let's talk about t-shirts. Swag. Supporting the InSession Film Podcast by checking out our awesome store.
Lots of good stuff there. Lots of clever t-shirt designs, courtesy of you, my friend. Really creative stuff that you put together here.
I appreciate it. We're putting out some fun t-shirts. We have Lester Bangs True Currency t-shirt that I absolutely love. I was wearing that yesterday. I might have to bring that on next week's show. I just got this little logo on. We got logo t-shirts as well.
We do.
Whether it be our main logo, we got Chasing the Gold, we got Women in Session available as well. We also just have like fun little saying designs up there. We got an Academy Award winning The Substance design that we just put up there that I really love if people want to go and check out.
It's incredible.
Yeah, we have an Arrival theme and a Arrival style t-shirt. We got a Midnight Special inspired t-shirt. We have all kinds of fun stuff. We might have a new one coming up fairly soon. I'm working on finishing the details on that. Brennan and I are
looks
going
pretty cool so far, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, I'm excited to get that one out. I'm going to buy it immediately as soon as we get it up on the store.
Let's just say it speaks to the mindset of all film critics out there.
Yes, absolutely. It's something that we've talked about a lot on this podcast.
Oh yeah, it's kind of the ethos of InSession Film. I'm surprised we haven't done this shirt earlier.
I know, 100%. So I'm looking forward to getting that up on the store. If you want to check out our store, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can go to our website, InSessionFilm.com. Just go to InSessionFilm.com/store. And there you can browse some of the t-shirt designs that we have there available. And we've noted before that our store is run through TeePublic. Well, TeePublic has offered a new way for people to check out our store all in one location. And they've made it very simple, very easy. If you go to InSessionFilm.com, InSessionFilm.com, InSessionFilm.dashery.com, Dashery, DASHERY, InSessionFilm.dashery.com. They make it very easy for you to go there, directly see everything we have there. It's very simple, and it's just a way. It's like having our store in one location there. So InSessionFilm.dashery.com. It's like a website within a website. So it's very easy. They make it very, very easy. Go check out the store there as well. That's an easy way to check out all of our stuff. So again, that's InSessionFilm.dashery.com, or just go to InSessionFilm.com/store. Either way, you'll see all the designs. Go get yourself a fun little t-shirt. You'll be supporting us in the process. And we really do appreciate your support. Okay, I think with all of that said, we can move on to our Best Picture movie series, to the year 1965.
Where the hills were alive.
The Sound of Music. This is a film that won Best Picture over Dr. Zhivago, Darling, Ship of Fools, 1,000 Clowns. Have you seen any of those other films, Brendan?
I've seen Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah,
it's been a while since I've seen it, but I've definitely seen it. I can't say I've seen the rest.
I am with you. I have not seen those other three. So it's hard for me to say how good of a year 1965 was on the whole, at least with those 5 films as a microcosm of that year.
Yeah, it's not like what we had to say a week ago when My Fair Lady won Best Picture over Doctor Strangelove or Mary Poppins, to say the least.
Yeah. Which also starred one Julie Andrews, who is, of course, at the center of The Sound of Music. So as we talk about The Sound of Music specifically, let's first talk about our history with it. When were you introduced to the film? I presume you've seen it once or twice over the years.
Probably more like 7 times. I think I've seen this movie. This is another one of those. So for a little bit of inside baseball for those tuning in, if you listen to our My Fair Lady episode last week, I mentioned how I thought I had seen that movie before, but so much of it I didn't remember as we did that rewatch for that particular review. That must have been one of those movies I watched with my aunt growing up when I was a really young kid, going to visit her up in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. She had a lot of old movies in her collection. A lot of them were classic musicals, and My Fair Lady must have been one of them. The Sound of Music was definitely one of them. And I know I saw that at a very young age, but it's one that stuck. It's one that always stuck with me as a childhood favorite. Yeah. It's one that we always watch together. My family loves this movie. So this is one that actually did stay with me, unlike My Fair Lady, which maybe I didn't even watch My Fair Lady. Maybe I just saw the DVD or the VHS in her collection and assumed that I must have seen it because it just had a very iconic sort of poster to it. So it could have just been one of those situations. And maybe it was ultimately a first-time watch for me when we did that review last week. But no, The Sound of Music, I've got a lot of history with this movie. I've never seen a stage production of it. Nor have nor have I seen any of the other stories about the Von Trapp family. That I know that there are a few Austrian and German films made about them as well. Really, my only connection to this story is this particular film.
Yeah, no, I am completely with you in that regard. I had seen this film when I was young. I've talked on the show a couple of times how access was limited for me when I was younger because my parents weren't really into movies. We didn't really have much growing up. Yeah. So as far as becoming a cinephile and movies becoming a big part of my identity, that mostly didn't come until high school and later on into college for me. The Sound of Music, though, was one of those iconic movies that I did get access to because my mom was a big fan. Funny enough, also big on Mary Poppins. Maybe she just loved Julie Andrews. I don't know. But
a lot of people did. A lot of people did.
Yeah, of course. It's hard not to fall in love with her. Mary Poppins was more prominent in our household, but we absolutely did see The Sound of Music. And then I did catch up with it again sometime in college. That was the last time I had seen it. So it'd been a while. It had been nearly a few decades between this viewing and my last viewing when I was in college. So I was very excited to catch up with The Sound of Music once again. And I do love having those experiences, even though you've seen the film a couple of times, you know what to expect, you know the music, you know the imagery. But when you're away from it for 20-ish years.
Yeah, you get some perspective. Sometimes it's good perspective.
There's a new perspective. There's things about the film that you forgot about. And it is this really interesting, almost new experience in some ways, which is always really fun.
Yeah.
And you couple that with other context we're about to get into, and oh boy, The Sound of Music. It's what a movie. All right, let's jump into this.
Okay.
The Sound of Music. It is directed by one Robert Wise. And it stars Julie Andrews, Christopher Plummer, Richard Hayden, Peggy Wood, Chairman Carr, Eleanor Parker, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. Nicholas Hammond, Heather Menzies, Dwayne Chase, all part of the Von Trapp family, Angela Cartwright as well. If you are not familiar with The Sound of Music, and forgive me because I'm trying to pull up my notes as we talk here, it is about a young novice who is sent by her convent in 1930s Austria to become a governess to the 7 children of a widowed naval officer. All right, Brendan, what say you about The Sound of Music?
We often talk about doing these movie series and how sometimes a film can shift for you. Sometimes it gets better, sometimes it gets worse when you actually do them in such a tight order with each other. You see these movies in such close proximity with one another, especially if it's a director's work. And, coming off the heels of some of these movies in this series, maybe that has something to do with my response of The Sound of Music now. This was always a childhood favorite of mine, much like West Side Story, also directed by Robert Wise. So we should point out Robert Wise making his second appearance in this 1960s Best Picture winning series. I was always more fond of The Sound of Music. I think it was just the color of it, the energy of it certainly spoke more to my childhood mind. And it is, at this point now, of the two, it is the one I still slightly prefer. I still quite love this film. I did like it a little bit more on this rewatch. I'm not sure if it's the film that's aging well or just simply watching it right after My Fair Lady, because there was nowhere to go but up after that.
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking it's the latter. And that's not a knock on The Sound of Music. I think it's doing a lot of wondrous things that we'll certainly talk about. Robert Wise is just one hell of a director. We talked about this with West Side Story, and he brings some of those same sensibilities once again to The Sound of Music. Yeah. If anything, I think The Sound of Music has maybe my favorite opening shot from any movie musical.
Oh my God. Yeah. Unquestioned.
Maybe the only other rival I can think of is the opening credits for The Umbrellas of Cherbourg and the use of the actual umbrellas. A very different kind of opening scene, but I think that's maybe the only other rival I can think of offhand. What I love so much about
and forget about quality, just in terms of iconicness.
The scope
if anything
of it
touches The Sound of Music in that regard.
It's not even just the beauty of the Austrian Alps that it's capturing, but it's how it transitions from cold and brooding snowy landscapes to the beautiful green hills, which just feels so effortless. And it's
then
also
right into that song.
Yeah,
opening number.
I love that transition. I love how it sweeps into it. So the technique of it is really cool. But in doing so, in transitioning from that cold and brooding sensibility to something more playful and light and fun and beautiful, kind of suggests these two emotional extremes kind of battling each other, which this film very much represents. This is at times maybe the schmaltziest movie I've ever seen, especially in its depiction of music as a savior of sorts. And it's not until it reaches its final act when it becomes something else entirely, and those same songs that brought so much optimism no longer have the same meaning. And I think that transition is really effective. I've always found the journey quite emotionally stirring and also kind of wonderfully romantic. There are a lot of other things that we can talk about. I'm really curious to see what you think about it, given this rewatch. I quite love this film, but I know not a lot of people do. I know it has a bit of I don't want to call it a divisive reaction nowadays, but it's not as revered as some of the other Best Picture winners of these decades that we're talking about. So I certainly understand that, but I do quite love this one.
I think those people are out of their goddamn minds.
Good answer. Good answer. Good answer, my man.
Extraordinarily well. It is 2025 after all. I don't know if the context of the current situation that we are in has anything to do with this or not. I never thought that having an anti-Nazi stance would give this film some extra weight, but here we are in 2025, and Captain Von Trapp ripping a Nazi flag has somehow become a war cry in recent years. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. But that is certainly, you can't help but think about that when you watch this film through that specific lens. But that aside, the music, as we noted, utterly iconic. It is phenomenal how so much of this soundtrack infiltrated the zeitgeist. Even people who haven't seen this film know these songs exceptionally well. They're some of the most famous musical numbers ever put to film, and for good reason. They are sensational. Julie Andrews, following up her stunning Best Actress winning performance in Mary Poppins with what she does here, has to be one of the very best back-to-back performances of all time. She is, once again, mesmerizing in this film, as is Christopher Plummer. I love their dynamic in this film. As simple and predictive, or even to Brendan's point, as schmaltzy as it might be at times, the way their stubbornness clashes early on is a lot of fun. And when that begins to fizzle away, it is endlessly charming, and the romanticism comes alive, much like the hills at the beginning of the film. And I love how it's the literal sound of music that changes everything for them. A simple reminder of the power of a song is all that it took for Captain Van Trapp, and how that is ciphered through his children. You can see his cynicism evaporate in real time as the camera closes in on Plummer. It is a brilliant moment of performance that I absolutely loved. As I noted, I haven't seen the film in 2 decades, and while I remembered much of the film, I was grinning ear to ear as if I was seeing this for the first time all over again.
Those small moments in between.
There is something magical about its sensational craft and how they unify to tell a very moving story about love and family and resilience in the face of adversity.
Yeah.
Maybe the context of 2025 does amplify that to some degree. Sure. I don't know. But when I watched this over the weekend, I did have a borderline transcendent experience with this. I absolutely
I'm glad
it.
to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. I loved
movie. Every second of it.
You know, it's interesting to talk about the chemistry between Julie Andrews and Christopher Plummer, especially given that apparently Christopher Plummer admitted to not having the best time
making this.
But I believe that they remained pretty close friends up until his death. So that's a little bit of, lovely irony, to say the least. But they do have really good chemistry because there's a journey to go on beyond just the romantic kinship between the two of them. That's something I took notice of, was how their romance is not immediate. It really does take its time and allows this film's nearly 3-hour runtime to justify its length. Captain Von Trapp has to learn to love himself and his children first before learning to love Maria, and receiving that kind of love that she has to give in the first place. And the joy that she brings, the looseness that she brings that's beneficial to a child's life, something that Von Trapp has failed to instill on his kids, given the passing of the mother of their mother, his previous wife. He treats them like employees, essentially. He runs it like he would a Navy captain. So there's a bit of a psychological edge to it, and how people who are in mourning tend to bring their work home with them. They can't. They need it as that distraction. And Christopher Plummer, in his performance, he has to learn to love himself first, which is what makes the romance between Maria and George, I believe his name is. That's why I think works so well. There's a gradual build to it. It actually takes its time. It's like an escalator as opposed to an immediate lustful attraction, if you will. And I love movies that do that justify the runtime for it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, again, that's why the music here is so incredible. One of the best things about it is how the music really does become the nucleus of this story on a deeper level, not just on the surface, how it becomes a diverting part of the film, but in equal parts, it serves as an act of defiance against the Nazi regime, who are trying to force Captain Von Trapp into the Nazi Navy. And the family uses music as a means to fight back against an ideology they oppose. But it's also something Maria uses defiantly against Captain Von Trapp in his initial orders, because she knows the power it has emotionally. It's something that chisels through the grief of the Von Trapps, especially the captain. And as a result, Maria's disobedience directly leads to healing and joy for the Von Trapp family, which not only changes them and brings them closer together, but reveals to Maria that this really is her calling. This is what brings meaning to her life. And I cannot emphasize enough how good Julie Andrews is here and how she taps into that.
She's
with her
wonderful.
Performance.
She's wonderful.
She understands intimately how music defines Maria. And when she has that realization, it is such a magical moment in this film. It really, really is incredible. And how that tethers to what you're saying as far as the captain, how he has to learn to love himself. Again, I mentioned it in my opening thoughts, but to reiterate it once again, that specific moment when he has that epiphany, how it is ciphered through music, it is simple filmmaking in some degree, but
it's earnest.
The performance, it's earnest, it's sincere. It's absolutely incredible.
This movie is the pushback against any criticism for a movie being too schmaltzy, where schmaltz is strictly used as a negative. Movies can be schmaltzy in the right ways. This is an example of a movie that utilizes that type of sentiment to its advantage. A lot of it is because of how earnest that it is. Performatively, the filmmaking, as we talked about, Robert Wise just on another level with the way he crafts these musicals. And it's one of the most gorgeous looking movies I've ever seen, if I'm being honest. And I'm with you. I love Julie Andrews' performance. The way she portrays Maria as someone that's essentially out of place in this convent. She thinks that she's ready for this life merely because it was something she found beautiful as a child, kind of naively, and that her upbringing seemed to suggest that this is something she was supposed to do. It was all about this sort of social structure in a way. So she's utilizing music as a way of pushing back against that structure. Things like organized religion or really strict parenting and strict upbringing. It's meant to push back against that, which is where the Nazi symbolism then comes into play in the final act. I find that interesting because apparently the real life Maria Von Trapp actually said that wasn't really true for her. She actually did want to become a nun. She truly did, and actually had some regrets that it didn't go that way for her. But this is kind of a loose, fictionalized depiction of that, which again, that's fair. I know that because of that, the movie was a bit criticized in both Germany and Austria for not portraying the Von Trapps as accurately, but they had their own movies that did that. This is more of a reflection of how Americans and other neighboring cultures can understand their story, at least the thematic context of their story, and really what it meant for Austria to be so unfairly seized by Nazi Germany and as rapidly as they were. It kind of speaks to how Austria as a nation has remained so consistent over the years. A lot of people say that it's a land that feels lost in time because they feel so like appreciative of that culture. So to have something like this happen, it makes that historical outcome all the more devastating, which is why I think everything in the final act is really effective.
I agree. And I think it gives credence to that schmaltziness that you're talking about. It sounds like cliche wall art, but at the heart of this film, it is about love and family and standing up for what is right. And the history of humanity suggests those things will always be relevant. That is the story of humankind. There will always be some sort of tyrant trying to gain power over everything. And there comes a moment where you have to draw lines in the sand, even if that comes at great risk and personal consequence. In the case of The Sound of Music, it might be a wealthy white family at the center of it. And maybe that doesn't register with everybody, but the Von Trapps leaving their giant mansion behind to flee into the unknown, I do think is great symbolism, especially when you consider how close they were to Nazism. It's not as if the Nazis are distant villains here. They're friends of the Von Trapps, they're neighbors. There's, of course, Liesel's love interest getting swept up in Nazi ideology, making it personal and close to home, amplifying their choice in the end to avoid complacency for the sake of comfort. And in the middle of that, the film highlights how art and music can become acts of defiance, as I noted earlier, something that is historically vital with how it counteracts propaganda. So the music at the core of this film isn't just catchy and diverting. There is a thematic underbelly to it as well that, again, gives credence to the schmaltziness that we do see here, because it does speak to something that foundationally is the story of humankind. And again, you cannot help but draw the parallels to 2025 with Nazism, as prominent as it is in our society. Crazy that those words are coming out of my mouth, but that is the truth and the reality in which we live. I would like to hope that this film would be less relevant in another 100 years, but I don't know if that'll ever be the case. So as lovable and as affable and charming as this film is on the surface, I really do think when you dig beneath that veneer a little bit, there actually is something more to this film as it relates to avoiding complacency.
There's a lot of substance here. And I think one of the things the film does really well too is it doesn't hold your hand as it portrays the political ramifications of Austria being taken over by Nazi Germany. Because to your point, there are people in Austria that see this as a celebration, a good thing. So essentially, by the end of this movie, Austria is a divided nation. And to say a nation divided is not a relevant thing. That means you're not watching the news nearly enough. So
I don't know if you've been on Twitter lately or not, but
yeah.
It's a little divided.
It's a little at each other's throats. But that's essentially what happens to Austria here. It just so happens that the Von Trapps wanted nothing to do with it, and he being this captain, being forced into this situation as a Navy captain, he also wanted nothing to do with it. So they took matters into their own hands. I think historically, it's kind of interesting that their actual home that they ended up fleeing, I think, was taken over by one of Hitler's right-hand mans, if I'm not mistaken, which is kind of devastating to say the least. But there is a level of devastation that the movie is getting at in its final act. And I love the way it utilizes those same songs that we love so much at the beginning, but they become about something different. They become sort of not a battle cry, but a cry for something else entirely. They take on new meaning, even though they're the same songs. The melodies haven't changed. The lyrics haven't changed. But when you hear Von Trapp himself singing a line like "Bless my homeland forever," it means something entirely different in that final act than it did, an hour and a half ago.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I do love the backdrop of this film and how it depicts this family avoiding that complacency. It would have been real easy to simply linger in those comforts. They have this giant mansion. They have any sort of help that they need. It could not be better of a life for this family. And if they simply conceded to Nazism and he went to work for the Nazi Navy, everything would have been fine. They could have lived in comfort, but they would have had to reckon with those choices morally and ethically. And I do love how, to your point, the film doesn't hold your hand through any of that. We just simply see these characters react to something that they vehemently oppose, especially Captain Von Trapp. And he makes a decision. We're leaving all of this behind. We're going into the unknown. Who knows? Our lives on the other side will likely be completely different than this.
Yeah.
And that's a bold choice, especially when you have 7 children. And a brand new wife. And that does carry weight. And again, it's hard to separate it from the times that we're living in now. So maybe that is a little biased from my perspective. I don't know. But when I'm watching this over the weekend, I did feel that. And when he sings that song at the end that you're talking about, how that is recontextualized, it's fan-freaking-tastic. Another moment that stands out to me in a similar regard is when they're hiding behind the statue there at the end. And the little one asks Maria, because it's been established that when you're not feeling your best, what are you seeing? You're seeing, these are my favorite things. That's what brings me joy. That's what helps me cope. And she says, is this where we seeing my favorite things? And you see Julie Andrews with every ounce of desperation and urgency, but quiet and subtle, because they are hiding after all, simply say to her, now is not the time. Now we do not.
But she has to do it in a way that's also a lesson to a young child for her to understand that. All of a sudden, her motherly instincts are tapping into that too.
Yes. It's phenomenal. Like it's such an incredible moment that juxtaposes how it was taught earlier, but the circumstances provoke nuance that, as what, a 3-year-old she is in that moment, she's not going to understand those nuances.
That's why the movie does feel perhaps a bit schmaltzy and cutesy, is because it is trying to speak from the perspective of a child in some scenes. I think that's why I love some of the early scenes with Maria and the children, especially when she's first introduced to them. They take a pretty immediate liking to her. And when I say immediate, I mean like 5 or 10 minutes. They're at first pretty dismissive of her, like they've been with any other governess that they've had to deal with.
Yeah.
But when you get to that dinner scene, which happens pretty quickly after the whole pine cone incident that happens, they take a pretty immediate liking to Maria, because she does something that I never really noticed up until this rewatch, is that these children are probably used to having a governess-like figure stand up to them, but not someone that stands up for them like she does. That's why they start immediately crying at the dinner table, right? Because they don't really know how to recognize this level of compassion. And I never really picked up on that at first, but rewatching it again, there are little touches like that where no one child or even character comes out and says, you did this for us, you were the first to do this, and we love you for it. You just kind of go along with the emotional storytelling at hand. It's really smartly done.
No, it's incredible. And that makes a lot of sense because, as you noted earlier, their routine with their father is extremely strict. It's all routine. He blows the whistle. You are a soldier in that house.
Yeah.
There's no childhood to be had. And Maria comes in and wants to completely disrupt that, which again, going back to how she's disobedient herself toward the captain. And that creates some incredible conflict between them. That is quite electric at times. And I do love that. But she wants these children to be children.
Yeah.
And boy, oh boy, if there is a theme in art that registers with me more than anything else, it probably is that. Citizen Kane is my favorite film of all time for those reasons.
Sometimes being a kid is so cool.
It's the best. It is the absolute best. And she just wants those kids to be kids and showing them compassion and coming to their level instead of trying to stand above them, to your point. Yeah, of course, that's something they've never experienced. It's very indicative with the visual storytelling and the performances. And that's, again, one element of the film that maybe doesn't get enough credit is that it's not spoon feeding. I mean, this is a film that is romantic. It is schmaltzy, but it isn't spoon feeding. Like, there is a lot of visual storytelling that is going on here. And of course, much of it is channeled through the music itself as some sort of thematic tool alongside of it being a narrative one.
Yeah, this is basically the best live action Disney movie not distributed by Walt Disney.
Yeah.
But it does carry some of those
sure
same...
Disney was proud of it, though.
Oh, but sure it does carry some of the usual Disney tropes, some of the same DNA, if you will. It is kind of reminiscent of the childlike wonder of, let's say, a movie like Old Yeller, which is a very different kind of movie, but it does have a similar sort of level of sophisticated innocence. It's the only way I can put it. But even like this movie, The Sound of Music, does have a schmaltziness to it, but it is very sophisticated. And that's the thing I think often gets overlooked, because this is a movie that apparently did get pretty mixed reviews when it came out from critics, even though it would go on to win Best Picture. I think a lot of critics at the time called out its sugariness, its sweetness, as perhaps a negative. And this era, the 1960s, we were getting great movies like Doctor Strangelove or even My Fair Lady, which, again, not a great movie, but it does have a level of darkness to it and a little bit of cynicism to it comparatively to something like this. Maybe these people were just more used to that. So for something like this to come around, perhaps the response is, oh, this feels like backpedaling. Like we're above this now. I don't know. There's a time and place for this kind of schmaltz if done right. There absolutely is. And this one does it right.
No, absolutely. And even if critics were mixed on it at the time, I do think, ironically, time has been beneficial to this film because those sophistications, I think, have come to the surface. Again, going back to the poetry that I noted earlier of history repeating itself and the story of humankind always having something to fight against. We have seen that over and over and over and over again over the years. It is very close to home right now, even here in the United States. And then look, in 1965, they had no idea that all these years later, that would be the case.
Sure.
But it's one of those things where they got it right. They got it right at the time. And look, if Dr. Zhivago had gone on to win, that would have been a great winner as well.
I like that movie. I need to watch it again. I remember finding that one being a bit too... I feel like, unlike The Sound of Music, I felt the length with Dr. Zhivago.
Yeah, sure. It is really long. No,
yeah,
I agree.
But I think by comparison, isn't it only maybe 20 minutes longer than The Sound of Music?
Something like that. I do think you feel the length of that film much more than The Sound of Music, but I haven't seen Zhivago in a while.
You do.
Yeah.
But again, it gets to that point that the length of a movie itself is not the problem. It's what the movie utilizes with that length and how it tells a story around that, if it justifies that length or not, whether it be too long or even too short. The Sound of Music at nearly 3 hours is a breeze. It's an absolute breeze for me. I don't think there's any wasted space. There are sequences that go on pretty long, but it's the right kind of moments that take their time for this romance, especially, to blossom when it does. Like I said, it actually does take its time. These characters have to learn to love other things before loving each other, which I love about that. Captain Von Trapp has to learn to love himself. Then he has to learn to love his kids again. And then he learns to love Maria. And I love that journey. And Maria goes through something similar too.
No, I agree. And circling it back to, because I don't want to lose my train of thought on what we were talking about a moment ago, as far as the history of this film, the context of it, and its schmaltziness, because this isn't the first time in the Academy's history where they've voted for a film to win Best Picture that had those sensibilities to it.
Sure.
I mean, we talked about Mrs. Miniver, 1942, when we started this series last year. The ending of that film, I mean, give me a break. I mean,
that is one of the most unintentionally hilarious endings I think I've seen in a Best Picture winner.
Like, it's crazy. We haven't got to the 50s yet, but An American in Paris has a lot of similar sensibilities as well.
True.
You could argue a little bit of Marty. I love Marty a lot, but it has similar qualities as The Sound of Music in that regard. So it's not as if this would have been new for the Academy at all. To your point, though, maybe critics did feel as if we've moved beyond that, but that's not how the Academy usually works, though.
No, the Academy is very unpredictable. Critically, I feel like maybe they were responding to the fact that the 60s presented maybe a new wave of American filmmaking that would then become even more noticeable in the late 60s into the early 70s. And I think we were getting glimpses of that in the 60s, and The Sound of Music just wasn't in that same company, I guess. Which, again, just speaks to the timing of it.
Yeah, and again, I think the irony of that is through hindsight, The Sound of Music, I would argue anyway, I think it is a compliment to that wave.
Oh, I don't disagree. I think given the conversation we had here, there is a sophistication to this movie that does reveal really different things. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a sophistication to it. And not only that, you think about the technical craft at work here, the sweeping camera work, the use of the hills, the shooting in Austria. They did shoot this in certain places in Austria. The craft, the production design. I mean, we talked about this with My Fair Lady last week. Really, the only good elements of that film are its craft. And the costumes are really great. Some of the camera work is fantastic. But The Sound of Music blows that film out of the water.
We should really do a Robert Wise movie series.
Yeah, I would be down for that. He actually has, I mean, we've talked about his musicals because they're the ones that won Best Picture here, at least of recent, but he actually has more of an eclectic mix than how we've talked about him here on the show.
His filmmaking is wild. His history is wild. He would have another Best Picture nominee in the 60s with The Sand Pebbles. But he also directed Star Trek, the motion picture.
Yeah.
Which I'm actually kind of a defender of. I don't think it's a great movie, but I'm kind of a defender of that one. The Haunting, The Day the Earth Stood Still, the Andromeda Strain rules. That he's got a couple what I guess are perceivably B-level horror films here that I think are really intriguing. The Body Snatcher.
Yep.
He's directed a lot of movies.
The Day the Earth Stood Still.
That's I love that movie. It's been a while since I've seen it, but I thought that was really good. There's one here I know. It's a movie called The Setup that I know some of our fellow colleagues have talked about. I haven't seen it. So this might be a filmmaker that's primed for a movie series. He is a perfect candidate.
I think so. Yeah, I would love to get into Robert Wise. Especially since we've now done some of his...
We've done 2 of his movies, so we've already gotten some, headway here.
Absolutely.
Did you know that this movie was originally supposed to be directed by William Wyler?
No, but that would have been fascinating. That also could have been really interesting.
Yeah.
But Robert Wise, the composers and the composition, the song work here, extraordinary how it all works cinematically. I would love to see this on the stage. I've never seen it on the stage, as we mentioned earlier. But cinematically, I do love how this film uses that music. Again, both as a musical movie, it is very diverting in that way, but there's also a thematic proponent to it as well. I love the way it repeats certain motifs. I think is really interesting. The melodies, of course, are extremely catchy. It truly is incredible how many numbers here are so prominent in the zeitgeist that again, you would know them even if you've never seen the movie. They're just so incredibly popular. It's wild. The soundtrack
they repeat themselves a lot too. This is weirdly a musical in the traditional sense, but also in the more like performative sense, kind of like it almost kind of sways back and forth between, something like West Side Story, which we talked about earlier, and then something like a John Carney movie, like Once. There's a bit of a pendulum happening here between both sides of this being a movie musical and a music movie, which I think is pretty intriguing, and yet it's very seamless. It's a very nicely balanced act.
It is. Yeah.
I love this movie.
It's so good.
Yeah. I think as far as these Best Picture series that we've done so far, between the 40s and the 60s specifically, because that's all we've done, thus far, the 40s, I feel like tells a more consistent story, historically speaking, between what movies were chosen to win and why, just given the circumstances of what America was going through in the 1940s and World War II playing a huge part in that. But the quality of the 1960s thus far, 6 movies in, at least 3 of them get a 5 out of 5 on Letterboxd for me.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, I've loved this series so far. I mean, The Apartment, West Side, Lawrence, and now The Sound of Music, all timers as far as I'm concerned. Incredible Best Picture winners. Yeah. And that's why I was excited to dig into the 60s because, it had been a few years since I had seen many of those movies outside of Lawrence of Arabia. That one I had seen in recent years. But West Side Story, The Apartment, The Sound of Music, I was dying to revisit those. And some of these will end up being new watches for me. And we've covered even a couple of those. Tom Jones, My Fair Lady, those were first-time watches. And I didn't love those as much, but I am extremely happy that these other iconic movies that I already loved have really stood up in many regards. And The Sound of Music, again, it's not just the iconic music. You could argue it's outside of Lawrence of Arabia because that's on a stratosphere of its own. But
that invented a new level.
It invented a new level.
It's weird to say, like,
planet.
It is clearly the best of these in this decade.
Well, I was going to say specifically the craft work. When you're looking at costumes coupled with camera work, interiors, exteriors, the choreography of it, you couple that with the performances at the core of this, the urgency dramatically that we get at the end of the film. The craft work to The Sound of Music is just absurd. It's really, really great. And then you combine all of that with everything else we've been talking about in terms of its thematic prowess, the storytelling, the character work. It's a great movie. I don't care how schmaltzy it is. In this case, the schmaltz, I think, is welcomed. It's a
handles it well
to the concoction. Yes. It works for this movie, and everything else is so stinking glorious. It's absolutely fantastic. It is one of the best films of this decade.
Oh yeah, sure. I agree. Yeah. It's quite magical stuff. Yeah. I don't want to reveal this too soon because we obviously have, we have 4 more films to get to in this Best Picture series of the 1960s.
Yeah.
I mentioned this earlier. I feel like Lawrence of Arabia is and probably will remain the quote unquote best of these. It's possible The Sound of Music ends up actually being my favorite, which I think is a very different thing. I love this one. That's all I'll say about it.
It's funny that you say that because I was actually talking with my wife about this the other day because we actually watched this together.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe that had something to do with it because
maybe.
I watch movies much anymore.
I watch this with my wife as well, so I guess that does say something about our conversation here.
Yeah, I don't know because I sadly don't get to watch movies with her all that often anymore. But I could not stop thinking about this movie after we watched it. I could not stop thinking about it. I loved it. I listened to the soundtrack like 16 times in a row. I just absolutely adored it. I was on a high. I thought it was great. Like I loved every second of it. And I cannot say enough good things about Julie Andrews here and her performance. It truly is stunning. And Christopher Plummer. I thought together they were immaculate.
Aces. Honestly, 100%. One of the best romances of its time, too.
Oh my gosh, it's so good.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, I know. I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Yeah, Lawrence of Arabia will probably be the best of the decade, but as far as my favorite, I might be with you. We'll see on the other 4. I don't want to get too far ahead.
Yeah, because I remember really loving Midnight Cowboy when I first saw that. So
yeah, for sure. That one as well. Same, yeah. And I look forward to giving that one another go as well. But, yeah, very possible. And I don't know if I would have guessed that when we started the 60s some weeks ago, but here we are.
Yeah. Here we are. I'm kind of with you. I like being surprised.
I do too. And I love West Side Story. Love The Apartment. Love Lawrence. I don't know. There's something magical. There's something special. Sometimes it's just that lightning in a bottle. I don't know.
Sometimes you just have the right actors playing their respective roles. I feel like the same thing could be said about why I love Mary Poppins so much. Julie Andrews is just on another level in this decade.
Those 2 performances back to back. Are you kidding me?
That's illegal. That's just illegal.
Yeah. Speaking of one of my favorite behind the scenes of The Sound of Music, in between takes, she would sing Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious to the children.
Oh yeah, but they had no idea what it was because apparently they were filming this before Mary Poppins even came out.
Yeah, at least in Austria. It had come out in the States, I think, but I don't think it had come out in Austria. So yeah, they weren't
It's hilarious.
familiar with it. But that is so funny that she would sing. Could you imagine when they finally did get that movie in Austria? Those kids lost their minds, I'm sure.
There are little tidbits about this movie as far as the trivia is concerned that I think are weirdly more charming than other pieces of trivia I see in other movies. Like the fact that when Julie Andrews first enters the Von Trapp household, she trips. That was actually apparently a real accident. And Robert Wise just kept it in the movie because he thought that was a very natural response for Marie to have in that moment. Little lucky accidents like that sometimes can make a movie.
It's good stuff. All right. If you agree or disagree with anything we had to say, you can leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can always email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. All right. As we wind down here, just a reminder that we do have a few reviews coming out this week. We are going to be talking about the Jason Statham film, A Working Man, because we are working men and we support the working man.
Blue collar.
So you can be on the lookout for that. And then we will also talk about Death of a Unicorn. We love unicorns. We're a unicorn family around here.
Maybe not these kind of unicorns, but nonetheless.
But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about those pesky unicorns. So I look forward to getting into that. Stay tuned for Women in Session later on this week. They'll have a new episode out as well. So with that, I think that is it for this week. Brendan, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I'm just glad the power didn't go out. We both had storms in our respective territories, right?
We did,
yeah. Even my parents, where they live, which is about an hour and a half north of me, apparently got some tornado warnings. Weird thing to start getting this time of year, especially in Pennsylvania. Yeah. So, yeah, Mother Nature is acting a little finicky right now, but we made it through. And now that I said something, we're going to lose power in 30 seconds.
I know, probably. So we should just go ahead and
We're done. We're done. I'm trying to chance it. I'm living dangerously right now.
With all of that said, again, stay tuned for the reviews this week. They should be a lot of fun. We hope everyone enjoyed this episode. Look forward to seeing if Marvel can pull this off or not. We shall see. With all that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, my God. Love Julie Andrews. She's just the best.
Queen.